Thank you, Mr. Balakrishnan. Thank you, Sundarajan. And thank you, Mr. Ram. I am indeed totally overwhelmed by all the kind words that have been said about me. After this very, very comprehensive address by Mr. Ram, as well as our PUCL friend, Mr. Suresh, there is not much left to say about the state of India's democracy and its judiciary. However, I'll try and briefly summarize the state of our democracy as well as our judiciary today. So as Mr. Ram pointed out, as Mr. Suresh also pointed out, our democracy is dying not because of any emergency or a military coup, but as these Harvard authors of this book, How Democracies Die, have pointed out, it's dying by strangulating all our democratic institutions. There is an attack on freedom of speech and dissent. There is an attack on activists. If you see what has happened to the in the Bhima Koregaon case, where some of the best activists in this country have been arrested on absurd charges. If you see what is happening in the Delhi riots case, clearly there is an attack not just on the freedom of speech, but on dissent as well as on activists. There is an attack on all our institutions. There is an attack on Parliament. There is an attack, as we saw yesterday. Firstly, Parliament was not opened for the last 6 months, supposedly due to COVID. Even when it has been opened, the session is going to be curtailed. And even in this curtailed session, they don't even allow a division of votes on this farmers' bill. I mean, it's no proper debate is allowed. It's not even referred to the select committee or the standing committee. And even though the entire opposition wanted a vote, but a vote is not allowed, and it is just passed through in this bedlam by saying A's have it, A's have it. So there is a strangulation of even our nominal parliamentary democracy. There is an attack and clearly the subversion of the independence of our judiciary, as Justice Shah pointed out in his very eloquent Hosbet Suresh memorial speech 3 days ago. There is an attack on the Election Commission, on the independence of the Election Commission. There is an attack on the independence of the Comptroller and Auditor General. There is an attack on all our investigating agencies. Attack meaning they have been subverted. The independence of these institutions have been subverted. And they have been made instruments of the ruling party for their political ends. Whether it is the CBI or the Enforcement Directorate or the NIA or the Income Tax Department or the police agencies, each one of them has been rendered into an instrumentality of the ruling party in order to harass opposition leaders, in order to harass activists, in order to victimize people from the minority community, in order to even blackmail judges and other people occupying important posts, harass and intimidate and blackmail people occupying important posts in regulatory institutions like the judiciary, like the Election Commission. There is a complete destruction of the institution of Lokpal. Initially, they did not even appoint the Lokpal. But finally, when they were forced to appoint it, they appointed people even without having the leader of opposition as a member of the selection committee, they appointed people who are so useless that they have not even taken up one case for investigation over the last more than 1 year of their existence. The media has been totally subverted. If you see the kind of things that the mainstream media is spewing out, if you see the prime time debates on television, you find that they are spewing hate, they are spewing against the minority community, all kinds of fake news is being propagated, and absolutely irrelevant issues are being debated for months on end, like the death of this Prashant Singh Rajput. And through all this, and through the subversion of universities, which are supposed to be centers for critical thinking, discussion, and debate on important issues, they have appointed these RSS people as vice chancellors who have stopped or prevented any kind of academic debates and discussions in these universities. So there is an attack on critical thinking, there is an attack on scientific temper itself. The Prime Minister goes to inaugurate the Reliance Hospital in Bombay, and there he says that Lord Ganesha's trunk was stitched by a piece of plastic surgery. He goes and tells children that there is no such thing as climate change, and people have started feeling warmer because they are getting old, or because people are changing. He goes, his ministers say that chanting "Go Corona, go" will make coronavirus go away. Another minister says that I have invented some papad which will make coronavirus go away. All kinds of superstitious or nonsense is being spewed out by the Prime Minister and his ministers. This government has propagated a culture of violent and vile abuse, violent threats being administered on the social media by the BJP's IT cell and their followers to people who criticize the government, to people from the minority communities. And this social media hate spewing and abuse spewing machine is controlled and directed by the Prime Minister himself. As Swati Chaturvedi pointed out in her book, I Am a Troll, she pointed out that this BJP's IT cell, whose CEO is one Amit Malviya, who used to run porn websites a few years ago. He has now been made the CEO of the BJP's IT cell, and the chairman of this IT cell is the Prime Minister himself, who invites all these trolls who spew violent abuses and threats, who administer threats of violence and killing to people. He invites all these trolls over to the Prime Minister's residence and has photographs taken with them, which they can put up on their social media pages and say that proud to be followed by the Prime Minister. I mean, this is the culture that we are creating, that there is an attack on our civilizational values themselves. This is what is being done to our democracy. In fact, people say that emergency was the worst period for our democracy, when the fundamental rights had been suspended, lots of people were put behind bars, press censorship was put in force. What we are seeing today, this kind of comprehensive assault on every institution, on every norm of civilized behavior. They have let loose these lynch mobs on the streets, who are being encouraged not just by the government but by the local police. And when they register cases against the victims of this kind of violence. Even in the attack on Jamia, on the attack on JNU, cases are registered against the victims of the violence. No action is taken against even those people who are seen on video attacking people and so on. So I would say very clearly and unequivocally that today the assault on our democracy is far, far more serious than what was there even during the emergency. Of course, during the emergency, more people may have been put behind bars, but we didn't see this kind of absolutely vile and vulgar culture being promoted by the government in power. This assault on scientific temper, on critical thinking, on all our institutions, we didn't see that. And this kind of complete subversion of the media in order to create what is called a post-truth society, a society where people's capacity for critical thinking is bludgeoned to the extent that they cannot distinguish truth from falsehood. So, but having said all that, I would say, still agree totally with Mr. N. Ram that all is not lost because we are seeing a resurgence, especially of the youth in this country. They are standing up, especially on the issue of unemployment. Today, there was a huge farmers' rally in Bangalore. I just saw the videos of that. There are huge farmers' rallies now taking place all over the country, defying this imposition of Section 144, defying these COVID rules, etc. Because today, COVID is being used only as an excuse to lock down parliament, to lock down the judiciary, to lock down other institutions, and to lock down democracy itself by preventing any kind of political protests, physical protests from taking place. And it is high time that people started doing civil disobedience of this kind of attempt to lock down our democracy by preventing any kind of physical protest. So one very clear ray of hope is that despite all this, students are coming out, farmers are coming out and protesting now in large numbers in lots of places. And you can see it on the social media. For the last more than 2 weeks, the social media pages of the BJP and the Prime Minister, etc., you can see it that there are more dislikes than likes. The comments are all very negative towards them. So clearly, despite this whole BJP's IT cell being in action and every attempt to shut out comments, to shut out dislikes, etc., they are not being able to control the visibility of the anger of the people. And the other ray of hope that we see is that despite the attempt to control the media, and they're succeeding in controlling a large section of the mainstream media, there is this alternative media or the internet media which has come up, which is doing a fabulous job. And there are still some sections of the mainstream media which are standing up and holding out, like the Indian Express, like the Hindu, and several other uh, mainstream media organizations as well. But very importantly, because of the growth of the internet media, the alternative media, as well as the social media, we are now seeing that there are media organizations who are standing up despite the pressure on them and who are spreading the right kind of news. There are even individuals like this young boy called Dhruv Rathi who's sitting in Austria and producing excellent, very informative, excellent videos which are watched by millions of people. Similarly, people like Akash Banerjee, and there are many such people who are doing very outstanding independent journalism, people like Faye D'Souza, Barkha Dutt, Abhisar Sharma, so many people. Now coming to the judiciary, yes, undoubtedly, as Justice Shah pointed out in his lecture, the collapse of the Supreme Court that we have seen in the Modi years is unprecedented. It's more serious than what happened even during the emergency. That collapse is being seen in their not dealing with, not taking up for hearing important cases such as the challenge to the abolition of 370 in Kashmir, the habeas corpus petitions from Kashmir, the bifurcation of Kashmir into 3 union territories, conversion from state to a union territory, the internet shutdowns in Kashmir, the challenge to the CAA, the challenge to the electoral bonds. So many important cases which strike at the very root of our democracy are not being taken up. The issue regarding the violence in Jamia, the violence in JNU, and even the totally malafide manner in which the Delhi police has turned the riots, which were clearly engineered, planned, instigated by the BJP leaders, as is clear from the videos. They have turned it around and they are victimizing and arresting people who were involved in the most exemplary peaceful protests that we have seen in many years. The protests against this unconstitutional Citizenship Amendment Act were mostly led by women, and they were absolutely exemplary protests where there was not even a trace of violence, where people were being exhorted to read and understand the basic structure and principles of the Constitution, where all constitutional values were being promoted, and those very people are being now victimized and arrested for those protests under the guise of this investigation into the riots. The whole investigation into the so-called conspiracy for the riots has itself become a conspiracy in order to victimize and frame innocent people. But the Supreme Court is doing absolutely nothing to deal with that, to, to challenge that and to check that. It's their duty. It's one of the important roles of the judiciary. Perhaps the most important role is to protect fundamental rights of people, to protect democracy and its institutions, and to protect the Constitution. Today, when all these institutions are being bludgeoned or subverted by this government, when fundamental rights, not just freedom of speech, but the right to life and liberty is being trampled upon by this government who is using agencies which they have subverted in order to do this. We are seeing that the Supreme Court is allowing all this to pass as a mute spectator. So, but one good outcome of this contempt case against me has been, as Mr. Ram pointed out, that it has not only brought a great deal of focus and discussion on the collapse of democracy in India, but also on the collapse of the Supreme Court. It has also brought a great deal of focus and spotlight on the role of Justice Arun Mishra, who was clearly the chosen man or the chosen judge for 4 successive Chief Justices, for all the things that they wanted or the government wanted done. In fact, when we try and understand why the Supreme Court collapsed over the last 6 years, apart from, you see, there are many reasons. One is fear. That fear was there even during the emergency. That fear is there even now, despite there not being a formal emergency. because this government is so brazenly using the police agencies and the investigative agencies to target people who disagree with the government, that even judges are fearful that they may be targeted. There is also a problem of ideological affiliation to the ruling party. I mean, for example, Justice Arun Mishra made no secret of his ideological affiliation to the BJP. He invited all the BJP leaders to his residence for his nephew's wedding, in which even Shivraj Singh Chauhan, whose case he was dealing with, that Birla Sahara case involved Shivraj Chauhan, at that very time when he was hearing that case, he invited Shivraj Chauhan to his residence for his nephew's wedding. And he made no secret about his admiration for the Prime Minister. And his brother, who has been appointed totally against the rules, while Justice Arun Mishra was in the collegium. His brother, if you see his social media posts, as Suresh pointed out, he is totally communal. He cannot honestly subscribe an oath to the constitution, which every judge is obliged to do at his appointment. But that was ignored, quite apart from ignoring the rule that people under 45 cannot be appointed. That memorandum of itself says so. But all those rules were thrown to the wind in order to appoint a totally communal person who in normal course may even become the Chief Justice of India. The second way of subverting the independence of the Supreme Court has been through the lure of post-retirement jobs. I mean, Justice Gogoi was given a Rajya Sabha membership. Justice Sathashivam was made a governor. And Justice Arun Mishra will also, for sure, he will get some plum post or the other. So, of course, so far as Justice Arun Mishra is concerned, he was ideologically affiliated as well, quite apart from the lure of post-retirement jobs, etc. But the more serious thing which Justice A.P. Shah has written about in his Justice Suresh Memorial Lecture, as well as another article that he wrote in the Hindu, that if the government is able to control the Chief Justice for some reason, for example, there was that CBI case against the former Chief Justice Deepak Mishra about that medical college, in which the transcripts of conversations which the CBI had recorded showed that the former Chief Justice of Odisha and the middlemen were discussing payment of bribes to him very clearly for getting favorable orders in that case. Now, if the government has this kind of information with the CBI, with their investigative agency, that kind of information can be used to blackmail him. We had gone to the Supreme Court saying that it is very dangerous to allow a government-controlled agency to control such a sensitive investigation involving a Chief Justice. And therefore, this investigation should be handed over to an independent SIT monitored by the Supreme Court itself. But Justice Deepak Mishra himself, who should have been most interested in allowing that prayer, he himself subverted that prayer by first withdrawing that matter by sitting in a bench himself in a case involving himself. He withdrew that matter from the bench of Justice Chalameshwar and handed it over to Justice Arun Mishra, who then said that no, there is no need, just as he said in the Birla Sahara case, that there is no need to investigate important persons on the basis of loose papers. Here he said there is no need for this investigation to be taken out of the hands of a government-controlled agency and given over to an independent SIT under the aegis of the Supreme Court. So they didn't want any investigation. The thing is that in such a situation, the government can easily have a thing of you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. We will not allow this investigation to reach you so long as you keep doing what we want you to do. Same thing they did with the Kaliko Pul case. Kaliko Pul, in his suicide note, a 40-page suicide note, handwritten, every page signed. He said that two of these former Chief Justices, at that time, Justice Kher, who was the Chief Justice, and then the next Chief Justice, Justice Deepak Mishra, that there, in one case, Justice Kher's son and Justice Deepak Mishra's brother had asked for a bribe for deciding that case involving the imposition of President's rule in Arunachal Pradesh. And Kaliko Pul was the chief minister there. His suicide note normally is like a dying declaration, has to be taken very seriously. The Lieutenant Governor of Arunachal wrote to the government saying that this needs a CBI investigation. But the government didn't allow that. And when Kaliko Pul's wife went and wrote to the Chief Justice saying that, all right, at least have an in-house investigation in this matter, the Chief Justice who was involved in this matter, against whom the allegation was, Justice Kher, made it into a judicial case and sent it before the number 14, who was his subordinate judge in the Punjab and Haryana High Court. And that is why Mrs. Pul was forced to withdraw that case. So what has been happening is, and then there was the sexual harassment case involving Chief Justice Gogoi. As soon as he became Chief Justice, there was the sexual harassment case against him. And the government had all this information through the police, because this woman had gone to the police officer and made that complaint to him about the sexual harassment. It's another matter that the police officer couldn't do or didn't do anything about it. But all that information and that evidence was with the government. So if the government is able to somehow blackmail and control the Chief Justice, then through him, using the master of roster system, by which the Chief Justice alone has the power to send any politically sensitive case or any case for that matter to any bench of his choice. And as Justice Shah pointed out, that in such a case, you don't need to subvert the entire Supreme Court. You only need to subvert the Chief Justice and a couple of other judges. And thereafter, you can get every case, politically sensitive case, decided in the manner in which you want or in which the government wants. And that is what happened. And Justice Arun Mishra was the chosen man for most of these Chief Justices, for many politically sensitive cases. So, if we have to prevent this, we need many reforms in the judiciary. We have to do away with this whole business of the government having any say at all in post-retirement jobs of judges. We need to have a more robust system of selection and appointment of judges, which has a fair degree of transparency. This present system of appointment through the collegium, etc., firstly, there is no system at all for selection. There is no criteria that they have laid down. There is no basis for judging people on that criteria. As a result of which, arbitrariness and nepotism flourishes in judicial appointments. And this government has a particular record of even subverting the recommendations made by the collegium by just sitting on inconvenient appointments of independent judges and refusing to appoint them, refusing to issue notifications, and thereafter bargaining with the Chief Justice that, all right, you appoint our people, then we will appoint yours. And this is how people who are convenient to the government, who lack independence or who are ideologically affiliated to the government, are also being appointed to the judiciary. So we will have to have a totally independent judicial appointments commission, which is an independent body, independent of the government, independent of the judiciary, sitting judiciary also, which lays down a criteria for selection, a method for evaluating people on the basis of that criteria, and does this job with some degree of transparency so that people at least come to know Who are the people who are being shortlisted and on what basis? Today, there is no transparency whatsoever. Uh, but for all this, you see, there are, of course, many other reforms also required in the judiciary. We need to effectuate and implement the Gram Nyayalayas, which are supposed to be independent, which are supposed to be simplified courts, more accessible to the people for ordinary cases. We need to have more courts. We need to have better judges. We need to have a system of accountability of judges. Today, this impeachment system is totally impractical. It has failed. We need to have a judicial complaints commission to whom complaints against judges could be addressed and which could uh, have those complaints investigated and thereafter try the judge and thereafter take action against him. This doesn't need to be a politicized process as the present system of impeachment. But you see, nobody is interested in these reforms. And that is why we will have to have a people's movement. The government is not interested. The sitting judiciary is also not interested. The real stakeholders are the people who are suffering because of not having a properly functioning judicial system and the Supreme Court not having the requisite independence to protect the fundamental rights and democratic institutions and the constitution. So they are suffering, the people are suffering. They have to get together and have a movement for judicial reforms. But as I said, you see, one good outcome of the contempt case was that because of this spotlight being shown on the Supreme Court and on the last four Chief Justices, on Justice Arun Mishra, etc., uh, we have seen that there is some correction in the role being played by the Supreme Court. We are seeing that in that Sudarshan TV case, as well as some other cases. As Mr. Ram pointed out, several high courts have done and are doing a fairly credible job about standing up to this government and standing up to the kind of fascist onslaught that we are seeing. And let's hope that this kind of pressure and intense scrutiny of the people will improve the functioning of the Supreme Court also. So thank you very much.